Namaskar, this is Akhilesh Bhargava. Welcome to Tit-Bits on Business and Finance with me. Despite the high-level talks between the military commanders of China and India agreeing to de-escalate and diffuse the situation at the Galwan Valley, yet China continues to maintain an aggressive posture at Galwan and is said to have opened up yet another front at the Depsang Bulge in Ladakh. It is said that at this new front, China has amassed thousands of troops, forcing India also to do that. The fact is that in China, the government talks in one language and its military, the People's Liberation Army, talks in another. And that is what makes the entire scenario extremely untrustworthy. It is for this kind of dubious conduct on the part of the government and by the PLA that the US Secretary of State, Mr. Mike Pompeo, recently said that the PLA is a rogue army. We as citizens, we as consumers need to boycott China. We need to not let our guard down and to always bear in mind that China actually is enemy nation. It must be taken that seriously. The government on its part has started doing its bit. It is in the process of formulating about 5,000 quality regulations in order to ensure that cheap and low quality Chinese goods do not flood the Indian markets. There are reports that imports from China have already been stopped at various ports in order to check the origin of those particular goods. The government is also coming up with what is called reciprocity rules. That is, the very rules that China imposes on Indian companies when they want to go into China. India also now proposes to impose those kind of regulations. We wonder, why did we not do that so far? And while India continues to ensure that the market of India is denied to Chinese manufacturers, the government is also acting on to ensure that large infra projects do not go to Chinese companies. And a lot of action has already started so far. It is reported that the Haryana Power Generation Company has already cancelled 3 contracts which were awarded to Chinese companies worth 1600 crores. The railways have already cancelled 1 contract of 471 crores given to a Chinese company, and that has been cancelled for non-performance, and it is in the process of cancelling 4 more, it is said. BSNL and MTNL have decided that they are not going to buy equipment from ZTE and UA, and ZTE and UA, Chinese telecom equipment giants, are now being investigated by the government to see what are their links to the PLA, which is the Chinese army. In other words, the suspicion is, which US suspects, Australia suspects, New Zealand suspects, the suspicion is that UA and ZTE are actually fronts for the Chinese army. There are metro projects worth about $10 billion to be awarded, and the reports are that Chinese companies are going to be denied these kind of contracts. As we said, over 5,000 rules are being formulated, quality norm rules, in order to curb the entry of Chinese goods into the Indian markets. And with FDI restrictions being placed such that any Chinese investment coming into India is going to be double checked, that means even if a Chinese company does get a contract for an infra project, it is not going to be able to get its money into the country so easily, and that will certainly place obstructions on its ability to execute the contract as per the terms that have been signed. Thus, as far as the infra sector is concerned, India has started its efforts. India has started implementing a strategy to deny China access to these large infra projects in India. The question is, why has China been allowed to take infra projects so far? Not that a good number have been given, but why has China at all been given an entry into taking up infrastructure projects in the country? There have been many reasons for that. The first one, we all know that India has a huge backlog in infrastructure. We have an infra deficit, which they say will need at least $1 trillion in order to cure it, in order to ensure that infrastructure in India is of a world-class standard. Just one particular infrastructure, which is border roads, for example, India has had a huge deficit of border roads. And in the last 6 years, they say the government has constructed over 4,600 kilometers of extremely critical border roads. That's been the kind of infrastructure backlog that we have had in India, not just in the country, but also on very sensitive borders. We thus needed players to come into it and start taking infra projects. The second is, India has been trying to ramp up its daily construction of roads in the country. The NDA has managed to ramp it up from 2 kilometers a day when it came to power to 35 kilometers a day at present. And when you ramp up the construction, that means you need much more resources. You need resources which are far bigger in order to ramp up, escalate the construction of roads on a daily basis. Whether those contracts are given on an EPC basis, BOT basis, or the hybrid basis as it is called. You need finances, you need equipment, you need expertise, you need manpower. And India has been lacking those resources. Thus, we again needed to open the sector for all possible nations. And then, India is required to open the sector on a uniform basis under the WTO rules for all countries. Thus, if an American company is allowed to bid for an infra project in India, so would a Chinese company do. We had to implement that uniformity of rules, and thus even the Chinese had an opportunity to bid for Indian projects. The fact of the matter also is that most companies in the Western world, they have been avoiding India for various reasons. The primary reason is any business in India, especially when you're doing business with the government, and that too in the infrastructure sector, involves a lot of corruption. It also involves a lot of disputes. There have been dozens of large projects which have been stuck because of frivolous disputes initiated by the likes of NHAI. Thus, the capital of those companies gets blocked for an indefinite period because of various project complexities, which include awarding projects when even the land was not acquired by the government, and because of the unending bureaucracy and red tapeism. The foreign companies have generally been averse to taking up infrastructure projects in India, but the Chinese were willing to do so. Thus, they did get an entry into India's infra market. Just to tell you, for example, take the case of NHAI. Any project that comes in, the chances of disputes and arbitration are so huge that many a company have avoided taking up contracts with the NHAI. And that tells the story why most of the companies abroad avoid coming to India. Thus, Indian infra projects did not have many bidders for it. They did not have many takers. The Chinese were willing. Thus, as far as doing business with India is concerned, particularly in the infrastructure sector, India has actually earned a bad name, and thus it is a buyer's market. It is the buyers, which is the bidding companies, who decide whether to come to India or not, and most of them have actually shied away from it. The Chinese, on the other hand, they bid low. They came up with their own funds. They were willing to take up projects. They had the experience, the expertise, and the equipment, and they were eager to enter the Indian market. Thus, despite all these drawbacks that India has, they were willing to come to India, and thus they have been in the queue seeking infra projects from government authorities. Moreover, India actually lacks skills. There's a shortage of skill. There's a shortage of skilled manpower for the infrastructure sector in India, and we needed more companies with more people. So China did have a reason to get into the Indian market, and we could not have prevented it. But please remember, whenever a Chinese company bids for an Indian project, and even if it is awarded, before the final contract is given, that particular successful Chinese bidder is required to undergo a detailed background and due diligence test by India's security agencies for very clear reasons. Most Chinese companies have some linkage or the other with their government or the People's Liberation Army, and those who have such linkages are certainly not eligible to take up contracts in India purely for security reasons. And reports say most of the Chinese companies have failed. Thus, despite many of them bidding, very few have got, and rarely do we hear of any large Chinese company getting an infra project in the country. Now with this turn of events, it's going to become even more difficult for them. And that means that India is going to work hard to deny the domestic infra market to the Chinese companies, despite the fact that we need foreign participation in our infrastructure sector. This development certainly bodes good for the Indian domestic construction and infrastructure companies, whether it includes L&T, BHEL, BML, ABB, Siemens India, Dilip Bilcon, Nagarjuna Infrastructure, PNC Infrastructure, etc. It is certainly going to be good for them, provided they have the resources and the manpower to be able to take up the new contracts that the government is likely to give them. The larger picture here is that India needs to clean up its infrastructure sector. The government needs to get its act together and make it attractive for companies to take up government infrastructure projects. It is an extremely muddied sector and even the bravest shy away from it. The long-term solution lies in cleaning up the sector, because if that is done, why would a company not want to take up large infrastructure contracts? And because that is not done, you would notice companies from the West do not bid for construction projects in India. They are willing to supply equipment and machinery, but when it comes to construction, they actually shy away from it because the ground reality is extremely tough and hardship prone. We have never seen any company from the EU, the USA, UK and such nations take up these kind of projects, and that's the reason why perhaps China had an easy opening, which anyway somehow got denied to them and will now get denied to them. This is Akhilesh Bhargava signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.
हमारे घरों में भी बच्चे होते हैं जो हमसे प्यार दुलार की आस करते हैं।
हमारा भी जीवन साथी है जिसको हमारे ड्यूटी से घर आने का इंतजार होता है।
हमारे घर में भी एक बूढ़ी माँ है जिनके लिए आज भी हम ही आंखों के तारे हैं।
लेकिन हम हमारे घरों में नहीं हैं। आपकी सुरक्षा में कोई कसर न रहे, इसलिए हम अपने प्रियजनों से दूर हैं।
हम में से ही कुछ तो अब इतने दूर जा चुके हैं कि वो वापस अपने घरों को लौट भी नहीं पाएंगे।
हमें गर्व है कि हमारे कंधों पे मुंबई शहर के नागरिकों की सुरक्षा की जिम्मेदारी है। हमारे जज्बे और बलिदान को व्यर्थ न जाने दे। इस संकट के समय में आप घर पे रहे, सुरक्षित रहे।
Now be the first to know about the latest updates on our new news app. Go on your Android or iOS, search for HW News Network. Download our app, choose the language you prefer to get updates in, and be up to date with the latest news.
If you like this video, please share it, and we would love to hear your comments in the comments section down here. Also, please do like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter to get minute-to-minute news updates. For more such shows and videos, well, subscribe to our YouTube channel.